Out past the edge of the continental shelf, on a morning with no wind in it, there is a gray disk lying on its side at the surface of the ocean. It is about the width of a dining table. It is not swimming. One fin stands straight up out of the water, wobbling a little, the way a hand waves when the arm behind it has stopped caring. The animal is turned over so that one flank faces the sky, and that flank is above the waterline, dry in the sun, pale and rough and marked with old scars. Standing on it with both feet is a bird. The bird is an albatross. It has landed on the water beside this fish, walked up onto its exposed side, and started working. It moves a few steps, stops, tilts its head, and drives its bill down into the flesh. It pulls. Something comes loose, something long and dark and anchored deep. The bird swallows it and looks for the next one, and the fish does nothing. It doesn't flinch, doesn't roll away, doesn't sink. It holds the position. If you came across this and had no idea what you were looking at, you would call a stranding hotline. You would report a dying animal being eaten alive by seabirds. That reading is completely reasonable, and it is completely wrong. And the distance between the reasonable reading and the real one is more or less the subject of everything that follows. That fish is an ocean sunfish, mola mola. And what you're watching is closer to a service appointment than a death. Keep that picture. We'll come back to it at the very end, and by then it should look different to you. That's the only promise I'll make about where this goes. Now the number. If you know one single thing about the ocean sunfish, it's probably the eggs. 300 million of them. It's in the aquarium placard. It's in the nature documentary voiceover. It's the fact that gets pulled out at trivia night, the one that makes people put their drinks down. The most fertile vertebrate on Earth. 300 million eggs from a single female. And out of all of them, on average, 2 survive long enough to do it again. Because that's what a stable population means. 300 million in, 2 out. It's a spectacular number. It's repeated everywhere in almost identical wording. Across scientific papers, textbooks, museum signs, encyclopedias, and about 10,000 websites. And when you go looking for where it came from, the trail is much shorter than you'd expect. It goes back to one paper, 1921. A short piece in the journal Nature, 4 pages, written by a Danish biologist named Johannes Schmidt, reporting on what he'd found during a research cruise the previous year. The ship was called the Dana, a 4-masted motor schooner of around 550 tons, on loan from a Copenhagen shipping company to the Danish Committee for the Study of the Sea. Schmidt is not a minor figure, by the way. He's the man who finally worked out where European eels go to breed, which had been an open question since Aristotle. He tracked eel larvae backward across the Atlantic by size, until the smallest ones led him to the Sargasso Sea. That's the kind of scientist he was. Patient, methodical, willing to spend years on one question. On that voyage, he also examined sunfish, and in that paper, the figure appears. Roughly 300 million eggs, estimated in one female. One female, one fish, 1921. And here's the part that should slow you down. Nobody has done it again. I mean that literally. The measurement has never been repeated. In more than 100 years, across an entire century of marine biology, with all the ships and nets and laboratories and graduate students that century contained, the most famous statistic about one of the most recognizable fish in the ocean rests on a single count from a single animal, made before antibiotics were widely available, before the structure of DNA was known, before anyone had ever seen the deep ocean floor with their own eyes. Researchers who work on these animals say this openly. Ask a sunfish biologist about the 300 million, and you will not get a defense of the number. You'll get a version of, yes, that's from one fish in 1921, and it hasn't been re-examined since. Now, I want to be precise about what that does and doesn't mean, because there's a lazy version of this story where the number gets called a myth and thrown in the trash. And that version is wrong too. Schmidt was not making it up. He was a serious scientist doing serious work with the tools of his time. And the method he almost certainly used is still the standard method today. You don't count 300 million of anything. What you do is take a ripe ovary, remove a small sample, count the eggs in that sample by eye or under a lens, weigh the sample, then weigh the entire ovary, and scale up. That's it. That's how fecundity gets measured in fish, and it was how it was measured then. And the arithmetic is sound as long as the eggs are evenly distributed and your subsample is representative. So the figure is a legitimate estimate. It's an estimate from one animal that nobody has ever gone back and checked. And the moment you start pulling on it, the details begin to come apart in a way that tells you something. How big was the fish? Depends where you look. Some sources say the female was 137 centimeters, about 4.5 feet. Some say 1.2 meters, so about 4 feet. Some say 1.5 meters, about 5 feet. Those are 3 different animals. Fishbase, the big international fish database, lists it one way. A widely used academic species database lists it another. Popular accounts split the difference or pick whichever version they saw last. That's what happens to a number over 100 years of being copied, and it's ordinary enough that nobody involved did anything wrong. Somebody paraphrases. Somebody rounds. Somebody converts a unit. Somebody cites the person who cited the person who read the original. The figure itself, 300 million, is so clean and so memorable that it travels perfectly intact. The context around it, the size of the fish, the date, the method, the fact that it's an estimate at all sheds off a little at every hop. You've seen this happen with recipes. Somebody's grandmother wrote something down once, and 4 generations later the whole family is making it a specific way, and nobody can tell you why the oven has to be at that exact temperature. And the original card is long gone. The instruction survives. The reasoning doesn't. 300 million eggs is a family recipe that the entire scientific literature has been cooking from since 1921. There's one more wrinkle, and this one actually matters biologically. The 300 million is a count of eggs found inside an ovary. That is a different thing from a count of eggs released at one time. Work on mollid reproduction has found that the eggs inside a sunfish ovary sit at different stages of development at the same moment, some nearly ready, some far from it. In fish, that pattern is the signature of a batch spawner, an animal that releases eggs in several installments rather than emptying itself in one event. If that's what sunfish do, and the evidence points that way without settling it, then the standing crop of eggs in the ovary at any given moment is inventory, spread across several future releases, which means the sentence you've heard your whole life, that an ocean sunfish lays 300 million eggs at once, is probably wrong even if the count is right. I find that more interesting than the figure itself. The number is a party fact, and party facts are cheap. What we actually have here is stranger. One of the largest animals in the ocean, an animal that washes up on beaches from California to New Zealand, an animal that scuba divers plan entire vacations around. And the single most quoted thing about it is a 100-year-old estimate from one specimen that no one has ever verified. Nobody's at fault for that. It's a measurement of how hard this animal is to study. And that's the real subject here. The honest state of knowledge about the ocean sunfish is a patchwork. Some parts of this animal's life are documented in fine detail, with satellite tags and cameras and body temperature probes and DNA sequencing. Other parts are almost entirely blank. Nobody has ever watched an ocean sunfish spawn. Nobody knows where it happens. Nobody knows how fast they grow in the wild, which is a startling gap for an animal famous specifically for growing fast. Nobody knows how long they live. So here's what I'm going to do, and I want to be straight with you about the method before I start because it's the only honest way to tell this. Nobody has ever followed one ocean sunfish from egg to adult. No such record exists. There is no tagged individual, no long-term study animal, no aquarium specimen raised from hatching to old age. The life of this fish has never been observed end-to-end by anybody. What exists instead are fragments: a larva in a jar in Sydney, a juvenile in a tank in Monterey, a tagged adult off the coast of Japan with a camera strapped to it, a carcass on a beach in the Azores that took a crane to move, a stomach full of prey DNA sequenced in a lab in Portugal, fishery observers on a swordfish boat in the Mediterranean writing down what came up in the net. So we're going to build one. One animal, assembled from the pieces that have actually been seen. And I'll tell you where each piece comes from and how solid it is. Where the evidence is strong, I'll say so. Where it's one measurement from one fish 100 years ago, I'll say that too. We're going to start at the beginning, which is smaller than you think, and we're going to end back at that gray disc lying flat on the water with a bird standing on it. And the point of the whole exercise is this: the 300 million eggs are not a fun fact about a strange fish. They're the price tag on a strategy. They are exactly the number of tickets you have to buy when almost every ticket loses. Everything else about this animal, the missing tail, the cartilage, the impossible growth rate, the diving, the basking, the parasites, all of it sits downstream of one problem, and the eggs are the receipt. Let's go find out what the problem was. Start with what the female actually makes, because the strategy is visible in the product. An ocean sunfish egg is about 1/20 of an inch across, a pinhead. It has no yolk reserve worth bragging about, no shell, no casing, no attachment thread, nothing that anchors it to anything. It is a transparent bead of almost nothing, slightly buoyant. And the moment it leaves the female, it belongs to the ocean. She does not guard it. She does not carry it. She does not pick a sheltered nursery for it. As far as anyone can tell, and remember that nobody has ever actually watched this happen, she releases her eggs into open water somewhere offshore and swims away. And that is the complete extent of her parenting. Now hold that pinhead in your mind and put it next to the adult. A full-grown ocean sunfish can run 10 feet from fin tip to fin tip and weigh 5,000 pounds. The big ones outweigh a pickup truck. Getting from the egg to that animal means multiplying your body mass by a factor of roughly 60 million. That is the number you'll see in the aquarium literature. And for once, the aquarium literature is underselling it. Plenty of fish start tiny and end big. A bluefin tuna manages a multiplication in the tens of millions too, so the raw factor on its own is impressive rather than unique. The hard part is that the sunfish does it starting from a food source that is mostly water, in a habitat that is mostly empty, with a body that has thrown away the standard equipment for being a fish. We'll get to the body. The egg comes first because the egg is where the dying starts. A fertilized sunfish egg hatches in open water into a larva about 1/10 of an inch long. And if you've never seen a picture of one, I want you to actually look this up later, because it's one of the least probable-looking animals in the sea. It is a sphere, a tiny golden sphere covered in triangular spikes, like a medieval mace shrunk to the size of a grain of rice, with 2 enormous dark eyes and a little pursed mouth. It looks nothing like its parents. It looks like a pufferfish that swallowed a star, which, in a manner of speaking, is exactly what it is. Hold that thought, because that resemblance is not a coincidence, and it's going to explain the strangest thing about the adult body once we get there. For a long time, nobody could even prove which larvae belonged to which sunfish. The larvae are so small and so different from the adults that you cannot connect them by looking. You catch a spiked golden sphere in a plankton net, and it could belong to any of several species in the family, and the field guide simply could not tell you which. The connection was finally nailed down the modern way. In Sydney, at the Australian Museum, researchers took a tiny preserved larva that had been collected off the New South Wales coast, extracted DNA from a single eyeball because destroying any more of the specimen than that was off the table, and matched the sequence against tissue from adult sunfish. It came back as Mola alexandrini, the bumphead sunfish, the biggest of them all. That work was led with Marianne Nygaard, a researcher we're going to meet again later in this story, because she's responsible for one of the strangest discoveries in this entire family. Take a second with what that means. The heaviest bony fish on Earth, an animal that washes up on beaches and gets its picture in newspapers. And until DNA sequencing got cheap, we could not reliably identify its own babies. That is how wide the gap is between the two ends of this animal's life. The beginning and the end are so different that a century of biologists couldn't connect them without a genetics lab. And in between those two ends is the gauntlet. Here is what the open ocean is. For something 1/10 of an inch long, it is a place with no floor, no walls, no weeds, no burrows, no crevices, and no shade. There is nowhere to hide because there is no structure to hide in. The water column off the continental shelf is a volume of open space that makes every desert on land look furnished. A larva in that water is a piece of food suspended in the middle of a room with no corners, and the room is full of mouths. The mouths are smaller than you'd expect. The things that eat sunfish eggs and larvae mostly have no poster in a gift shop anywhere. They're other plankton. Arrowworms, which are transparent torpedoes 1/2 inch long with grasping spines around their mouths. Copepods. Jellyfish and comb jellies, which is an irony we'll have to come back to. Larval fish eat other larval fish, so the babies of anchovies and jacks and mackerel will take a sunfish larva without ceremony. The gauntlet works as a drizzle of small mouths, everywhere, all the time, day and night. And every single one of them is fatal to something that size. Then there's the dying you do, without being eaten. A larva that hatches into a patch of water with too little food starves in days. It has almost no reserves. That pinhead egg didn't come loaded. If the currents carry it away from the plankton bloom it needed, it starves. If the water is the wrong temperature, its development stalls and it dies. Nobody can give you exact percentages for sunfish specifically, because nobody has ever followed a cohort of sunfish larvae in the wild. And I told you I'd flag it when we hit a gap like that. What we have instead is the general arithmetic of fish that spawn this way, and the general arithmetic is grim in a way that's hard to hold in your head. For open water spawners, the survival curve falls off a cliff in the first days. Then it falls off another one. The overwhelming majority of eggs are dead in the first days to weeks. Of the survivors, the overwhelming majority are dead in the following weeks. Every stage kills most of what enters it, and the stages just keep coming. By the time you're counting fish that reach even the size of your thumb, you're working in fractions with so many zeros after the decimal point that the numbers stop feeling like biology and start feeling like accounting for an insurance company. An insurance company is honestly the right frame, because now we can state the problem. The one problem I promised you. The one that everything else about this animal sits downstream of. The problem is that the open ocean will not let you protect your offspring, and it will not tell you where or when survival is possible. Break that into its two halves, because both halves matter. First half, you cannot protect them. A fish that lives offshore, in water thousands of feet deep, has no nest site. There is no rock to fasten eggs to, no cave to guard, no beach to bury them in. Some ocean animals solved this by keeping the offspring inside their own bodies and giving birth to a few large, capable young. Sharks did that. Whales did that. It works, and we'll look at what it costs in a minute. The bony fish lineage, the sunfish belongs to mostly went the other way. And once you're committed to shedding small eggs into open water, Guarding is physically meaningless. You cannot stand guard over a cloud. The eggs disperse on the current within hours. Whatever happens to them happens hundreds of miles from wherever you'll be next month. Second half, and this is the half people miss. The ocean will not tell you where the winning water is. Larval survival depends on landing in water with the right temperature and enough of the right food at exactly the right weeks. And those patches move. They shift with currents, with seasons, with weather, with things no fish can sense at spawning time. The mother is buying tickets in a lottery where the winning numbers haven't been drawn yet, won't be drawn until weeks after she's gone, and are different every year. There are exactly two honest responses to a game like that. You can refuse to play it, make few offspring, make them enormous, feed them from your own body, guard them with your own life. That's the whale calf. That's the sea lion pup. Every one of those offspring is precious, and the mother's biology is organized around the fact that she cannot afford to lose one, or you can play it so hard that the odds stop mattering. Make the offspring so cheap and so numerous that somewhere, in some patch of water you'll never see, some of them are statistically guaranteed to be standing in the right place when the right week arrives. Stop trying to beat the randomness. Buy it out. The Sunfish bought it out. 300 million tickets, give or take a century-old estimate. And here's the turn that makes this a body story, and not just a numbers story. Once evolution commits a lineage to that second answer, the commitment doesn't stay in the ovaries. It reaches out and reorganizes everything. Because if eggs are cheap and each one is almost certainly doomed, then the whole game is volume, and volume has to be paid for. The female needs to be enormous, because egg production scales with body size, and in this game, fecundity is fitness. She needs to get enormous fast, because every year spent small is a year of buying almost no tickets. She needs to get enormous on the cheapest food in the ocean, because that's what's actually available out there in quantity. And she needs to do all of it without spending much on anything else, because every ounce of expensive tissue is an ounce that isn't eggs. Cheap materials, maximum growth, poverty food, total spend on reproduction. Hold those 4 requirements in your hand, and now look back at the animal. The missing tail, the cartilage where bone should be, the jelly diet, the 800 pounds gained in a year, the strange flat body lying on its side at the surface. Every one of those is about to turn out to be one of the 4 requirements, wearing a costume. Start with the one that everybody notices first, the one that makes children at aquariums ask what happened to it, the tail. An ocean sunfish doesn't have one. I don't mean it has a small tail, or a damaged tail, or a strange tail. I mean the structure that defines what a fish is, the caudal fin, the propeller that every fish from a guppy to a great white sculls from side to side to move through the world, is not there. The body just ends. Behind the tall dorsal fin on top and the matching anal fin below, the sunfish stops in a scalloped, rounded fringe, as if someone designed the front half of an enormous fish and then lost the file. The standard line you'll hear is that the sunfish's tail fell off, evolutionarily speaking, and got replaced by that fringe. The fringe has a name, the clavus, which is Latin for rudder, and the name is a fossil of an old assumption, because for a long time people assumed that's what it was, a stump of tail, doing tail things badly. The developmental biology tells a stranger story when researchers followed how the sunfish body actually builds itself. From that spiked golden sphere onward, they found that the caudal fin drops out of the plan early. Whatever tail structure the larva starts with is gone long before the fish is the length of your hand, and the adult grows no replacement for it. And the clavus, the fringe, appears to be built from modified elements of the dorsal and anal fins, the top and bottom fins which grow backward toward each other and meet, closing the body off, like 2 hands cupped around the space where a tail should have gone. So the accurate description of a sunfish is a fish that ended early and then patched the hole with material borrowed from its other fins. Why would any lineage do that? A tail is the engine. Ask any engineer to delete the propulsion system from a vehicle and patch the hole with body panels, and they'll want to know what's supposed to move the thing. The answer starts with the family this animal comes from, and this is where that pufferfish-looking larva stops being a cute detail and becomes the key. Sunfish are tetraodontiforms. That's the order that contains the pufferfish, the porcupine fish, the boxfish, the triggerfish, and the filefish. It's one of the strangest branches on the entire fish family tree, a lineage that has spent tens of millions of years systematically abandoning the standard fish playbook. Boxfish gave up flexing and encased themselves in a rigid shell of fused plates. Pufferfish gave up armor and speed and bet everything on inflating into a spiked ball. Triggerfish swim with rippling dorsal and anal fins instead of sculling their tails. Across the whole order, you see the same theme again and again. The tail stops being the main engine, the dorsal and anal fins take over propulsion, the skeleton gets simplified, teeth fuse into beaks. The sunfish's beak is exactly that. Its teeth are fused into a solid parrot-like beak, one plate above and one below, which is why its scientific family name, Mollidae, sits inside an order named for 4 teeth. The mouth can't even close completely. It's a small, permanently surprised-looking opening at the front of this enormous animal, and it works less like a jaw and more like a pair of shears attached to a pump. Keep the beak in mind. It's going to matter when we talk about what this animal actually eats, because a beak like that is a strange tool for the diet everyone thinks it has. The skeleton got simplified too, and in the sunfish, the simplification goes further than almost anywhere else in the vertebrate world. Fish vertebral counts usually run from the mid-20s into the hundreds. An eel can carry over 100 vertebrae, a salmon around 60. The ocean sunfish has 16 to 18. That's the fewest of any fish, and depending on how you count, close to the fewest of any vertebrate, demivertebrate with a proper backbone. The spinal column is a stub. There is no length of muscular tailstock behind the body because there's barely any spine to hang one on. And then there's the material itself. Sunfish are officially bony fish, the group that includes almost everything with fins that isn't a shark or a ray. It's right there in the record books. Heaviest bony fish in the world. Except that a lot of the sunfish skeleton isn't especially bony. Large portions of it stay cartilaginous, the flexible, flexible, lightweight stuff sharks build with and human ears are made of. And the bone that does exist is low density and often strangely spongy. An animal from the bony fish lineage, drifting back toward cartilage. That's not supposed to be a thing bony fish do. You now have 3 facts on the table that all point the same direction. A deleted tail, a stub of a spine, a skeleton going soft. Everything about this design says the same word, cheap. Cartilage is metabolically cheaper to build than dense bone. It doesn't demand the same mineral budget. You don't have to extract and place all that calcium phosphate. A short spine is cheaper than a long one. A missing tail and the entire block of red swimming muscle that a real tail requires is one of the biggest single-line items a fish can strike from its budget. Tail muscle in a tuna is a huge fraction of body mass, expensive to build and expensive to run. The sunfish deleted the whole department. I told you the lottery would reach out of the ovaries and reorganize the body. This is what that looks like. You're watching an animal strip cost out of its skeleton the way a company strips cost out of a factory, and for the same reason, the savings are being spent somewhere else. Every gram of calcium not spent on vertebrae, every calorie not spent building and feeding tail muscle, is available for the 2 things this strategy actually rewards: bulk and eggs. There's a second, sneakier saving hiding in the same design, and it has to do with weight in water. Most bony fish solve buoyancy with a swim bladder, a gas-filled bag that acts like an internal balloon and lets the fish hang in the water without effort. It's a brilliant organ, and most of the lineage keeps it. The adult sunfish doesn't have one. For a fish that can weigh 5,000 pounds, that should be a disaster. Without some form of lift, a body that size sinks. And fighting your own weight every minute of your life is an energy tax you pay until you die. The sunfish's answer is the strangest tissue in its body. Under the skin, wrapped around the whole animal, is a thick layer of gelatinous, low-density material, a firm, watery, cartilage-adjacent jelly that can be several inches deep. It's lighter than seawater. There's so much of it, and it's so much of the animal's volume, that it floats the fish. The sunfish replaced a gas bladder with a body wall made of something like structural jelly. Its buoyancy comes straight out of its building material, spread through the whole animal, with no dedicated organ involved anywhere. Now run the accounting on that tissue, because this is the trick underneath the entire animal. Jelly is mostly water. Water is free. An animal that bulks itself out with low-density, water-rich tissue is buying size at a discount that flesh and bone animals cannot touch. A pound of tuna muscle is protein-dense, energy-dense, expensive to build. A pound of sunfish is a much cheaper purchase because a lot of that pound is structured water, which means a 5,000-pound sunfish and a 5,000-pound whale are built from very different material at the very same weight. What you're looking at in the sunfish is the largest body the animal could possibly inflate from the nutrients it had, stretched over a frame of cartilage and floated on jelly. Cheap skeleton, cheap bulk, free buoyancy. The design starts to look like a ruthless answer to those 4 requirements. Get big fast, get big on poor food, and waste nothing on tissue that doesn't serve the goal. Which leaves one glaring problem, and if you've been paying attention, you've already spotted it. This animal deleted its engine. However cheap the body is, it still has to move, find food, cross oceans, and get to spawning grounds. A 5,000-pound animal with no tail muscle, and a body plan built out of jelly and cartilage should be a drifting derelict. For about 200 years, the entire world agreed that that's exactly what it was. The sunfish was famous as the ocean's great passive object, a giant plankton, a creature that goes where the current puts it and lies at the surface because it can't do much else. It's in the old natural histories. It survived into modern field guides. It's implied every time someone calls it a lazy, dopey fish, which people who work with them will tell you is the reputation this animal cannot shake. That reputation is wrong, and the proof has a serial number, because the proof came from electronics bolted to living fish. Starting in the late 1990s and accelerating through the 2000s, researchers began physically attaching instruments to wild ocean sunfish, satellite tags that log position, depth, and temperature, and then pop free and report home. Accelerometers, the same class of motion sensor that's in your phone, strapped to the fish to record every fin beat. Eventually small cameras, riding on the animal's back, looking over its shoulder at whatever it was actually doing all day. One of the people at the center of this work is an American marine biologist named Tierney Theis, who has spent a career putting satellite tags on sunfish around the world. And in Japan, a researcher named Itsumi Nakamura ran some of the most revealing deployments, tagging sunfish off the Japanese coast with cameras and thermometers. We'll be leaning on that Japanese work heavily in a few minutes, because it cracked open the single most misunderstood behavior in this animal's life. The first thing the tags did was kill the drifting myth on contact. Tagged sunfish swim, and they do it continuously. The accelerometer traces show constant, rhythmic fin beats, hour after hour, day and night. Tagged animals hold headings against currents rather than riding them. They cover real distances. Tracked sunfish have logged tens of miles in a day, and satellite tracks show seasonal movement spanning thousands of miles. Up and down the California coast, across stretches of the Atlantic, animals commuting between feeding regions on a schedule. When researchers compared measured cruising speeds against other big ocean fish, adjusting for size, the sunfish came out ordinary. Roughly walking pace, 1.5 to 2 miles per hour, sustained indefinitely. That's in the same league as some sharks and other large pelagics going about their day. Slow, then, and completely deliberate. The animal that supposedly went wherever the ocean pushed it turns out to log commuter mileage. And the physical question is how. No tail, remember? Fringe of repurposed fin material, where the propeller goes. Here's where the sunfish body plan reveals itself as a substitution, because the answer was hiding in plain sight. In the two fins everyone treats as decoration. Look at a sunfish head-on, and it stops resembling a fish at all. The tall dorsal fin above and the anal fin below are stiff, narrow, and tapered, and they are mirror images of each other. They're shaped like wings. High aspect ratio hydrofoils, the same blade shape you see on the wing of an albatross or the fluke of a whale. The shape fluid dynamics hands you whenever the assignment is efficient lift, and the sunfish beats them in unison. Both fins sweep together, side to side, left and right, like a pair of wings flapping in a medium 800 times denser than air. Each sweep generates lift-based thrust, the way a penguin's wing stroke does, or a sea turtle's. The fish doesn't wag its body. That stubby, deep body stays rigid, which is exactly what you want as a stable platform for flapping wings. The clavis at the back trails behind as a rudder and a trim surface, steering the flight. This mode of swimming has a name in the biomechanics literature, and the name deserves a moment. It's the same family of lift-based propulsion used by some of the fastest, most efficient swimmers alive. Tuna generate lift-based thrust with a stiff tail. Penguins and sea turtles do it with paired wings. The sunfish does it with an unpaired dorsal and anal fin acting as a synchronized pair. And as far as anyone can tell, it's the only animal of its size doing it that particular way. Fluid dynamics work on sunfish swimming keeps arriving at the same conclusion. For slow, steady, long-distance cruising, this layout is efficient on its own terms. Efficient, full stop, at the specific job of moving a large body a long way on a small energy budget, and competitive with the layouts that kept their tails. Stay with the reversal for a second, because it's a clean one. The tail was traded. A sculling tail is superb at acceleration, at sprints, at explosive escapes, and all of those are expensive. The sunfish's life has no sprints in it. Nothing about eating jelly requires a burst of speed, and almost nothing that size needs to flee. What its life requires is exactly what wings deliver: cheap, steady miles, hauling maximum bulk on minimum fuel. The animal deleted the sports car engine and installed a long-haul cruiser drivetrain built out of spare fins, and the reason is the same reason as everything else. Efficiency is eggs. Every calorie not burned on locomotion is a calorie banked toward bulk and reproduction. The wings answer one more standing mystery while they're at it, one you've seen in every photo of this animal without registering it. The sunfish's profile, that absurd tall cross shape taller than it is long, exists because the fins are the engine. An animal that flies on vertical wings has to be built around vertical wings. The body became a fuselage. The fish became, in the most literal biomechanical sense, a flying wing with a mouth on the front. A flying wing needs a pilot, and here the sunfish delivers one last insult to anyone still defending its dopey reputation, because the animal is pointed in the strangest possible way. The eyes are large, mobile, and good. Sunfish are visual hunters, which makes sense for an animal that spends its working hours picking translucent prey out of dim blue water, one of the harder visual tasks the ocean sets. The brain running those eyes, by contrast, is famously, almost comically small. A knot of tissue you could hide in a walnut shell. A fraction of an ounce of computer piloting up to 5,000 pounds of aircraft, People love that fact as a punchline. It works better as a lesson. Look at everything the tags recorded. The disciplined dive cycles, the thermal budgeting, the seasonal migrations that track temperature bands up and down entire coastlines, the reliable returns to cleaning sites, and then look at the walnut. None of that behavior requires genius. It requires consistency, the same profitable routine executed thousands of times without boredom or improvisation. And consistency is cheap to compute. A brain is expensive tissue, among the most expensive an animal can run, and this is the animal that deletes expensive tissue on principle. The sunfish carries a small brain because its life has been engineered until a small brain is enough, which is, when you think about it, a far more impressive act of design than intelligence would have been. How it actually navigates across ocean basins, what it senses and follows out there, current, temperature, magnetism, smell, is unknown. One more entry for the shelf. The tags tell us where it goes with beautiful precision. Nothing yet tells us how it knows. They can even leave the water. This is documented, and it's one of those facts that refuses to sit quietly next to the animal's reputation. Ocean sunfish breach. A fish shaped like a millstone, flapping its way to the surface and throwing itself clear of the water, landing flat with a detonation of spray. Why an animal like this jumps is not settled. The leading suspicion, which we'll earn properly later, involves dislodging parasites, and if that's right, even the jumping is part of a story we haven't gotten to yet. Either way, drifters don't breach. File it away as one more crack in the old picture. The tags, meanwhile, were quietly recording something much stranger than mileage. And this is where the investigation turns, because it's where the animal's day stops making sense. The depth traces from tagged sunfish don't look like the depth traces of a surface drifter. They look like a seismograph having a bad week. During daylight hours, a tagged sunfish dives. Over and over, dozens of times a day. Down steep, hundreds of feet, sometimes 600, 800, over 1,000 feet down, occasionally far deeper, into the dim blue twilight where the surface is a memory. It stays down for a stretch, then climbs back up, down again, up again. All day long, a jagged sawtooth of vertical commuting, the animal spending its day yo-yoing through a water column taller than skyscrapers. Then, in between dives, the record shows the behavior that got the animal its name in half the languages of Europe. The fish comes to the surface, tips over onto its side, and lies there, flat. The famous sunbathing pose, the gray disc on the water, the thing sailors have been logging since the age of sail. The reason English calls it a sunfish, while Spanish and Portuguese call it the moonfish, and Germans went with swimming head. For centuries, this looked like the whole animal, a lazy giant flopped at the surface, warming itself for no particular reason, possibly sick, possibly dying, certainly not busy. The tags say that pose is the second half of a machine. The diving and the lying flat are one system, and you cannot understand either half without the other. To see why, you need the two numbers the tags were recording at the same time as depth, and the first one is temperature. Water off the continental shelf is arranged in layers, and the layers are brutal. The sunlit surface might sit at 65, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Drop 600 feet, and you can be in water in the 40s. That boundary, the thermocline, can be crossed in minutes by a diving fish, which means a sunfish commuting to 800 feet is commuting between a warm bath and a walk-in refrigerator, dozens of times a day. And the sunfish, for all its bulk, has no furnace. Like almost every fish in the sea, it burns no fuel to hold a body temperature. Apart from the slow cooling inertia of sheer bulk, which is about to matter a great deal, its body is roughly the temperature of whatever water it's sitting in, and its muscles, nerves, and gut all run at the speed chemistry allows at that temperature. Cold flesh is slow flesh, Every dive below the thermocline drains heat out of the animal and pushes every system in its body towards sludge. So the obvious question, the one the old naturalists never had the data to ask, what is worth that? What is down there in the cold and the dark that a warm water animal built for cheap cruising commutes into a refrigerator dozens of times a day to get? The answer is dinner. And the dinner is the part of this story where the popular version of the sunfish goes wrong in the most expensive way, because the error hides the entire logic of the animal. Everyone knows sunfish eat jellyfish. It's the second fact on the aquarium placard, right after the eggs. A giant that grows to 5,000 pounds on jellyfish, the ocean's emptiest food. And like the eggs, the fact is real, but the picture built on it is not. First, the food itself, because the numbers here are the whole point. A jellyfish is around 95% water. Ounce for ounce, jelly tissue delivers a small fraction of the calories of fish flesh. Most of what you swallow is salt water with a whisper of protein suspended in it. Eating jellyfish for a living is like trying to run a freight company on a fuel that is mostly air. The standard question people ask is charming and backwards. They ask, how can a sunfish get so big eating only jellyfish? The real question is the reverse. Given that jelly is the deal on offer, what kind of body could possibly make a living on it? Ask it that way, and you can almost derive the sunfish from first principles. The body would need to be huge because processing dilute food takes gut, and gut scales with body. It would need to be cheap to build and cheap to run, because the fuel margin is razor thin. It would need efficient, unhurried locomotion, because chasing anything fast on a jelly budget is bankruptcy. Cheap materials, wings, no sprint engine. You already know this animal. We built it 2 segments ago. The gut, by the way, holds up its end of the bargain. The intestine of a big sunfish, unspooled, can run many times the length of the fish, which is the classic signature of an animal whose food needs a lot of slow squeezing to give up its calories. A short gut is a luxury of rich diets. Sunfish plumbing is a processing line for bulk, dilute cargo, and the animal is, functionally, a slow, warm tank built around it, digesting its way across the ocean. Then the beak earns its place, a fused shear at the front of a pump. Sunfish feeding, where it's been watched, is a matter of slurping and clipping, sucking in soft prey, shearing off pieces, spitting and re-sucking to break gelatinous bodies into swallowable slugs. A beak like that is more tool than open water drifting jelly requires. It suits tougher, more structured prey, and clipping off the specific parts you want. Hold that discrepancy. A tool that's slightly too capable for the job description usually means the job description is wrong. It's wrong, and it fell apart the modern way. Molecular biology went through the stomach. Off Portugal, researchers ran DNA metabar coding on the gut contents of sunfish taken as bycatch, meaning they sequenced the shredded, half-digested slurry in the stomachs and matched the fragments against libraries of known species. That's the technique you use when a diet is invisible to the eye, because gelatinous prey digests into nothing recognizable within hours. And what came back was a far broader menu than any placard has ever printed. The stomachs of smaller, younger sunfish were full of coastal food, crustaceans, small fish, bottom-associated invertebrates, the ordinary buffet of the continental shelf. The gelatinous specialization strengthens as the animals get bigger and move offshore. The clean version of the story, jelly from cradle to grave, was an artifact of mostly studying big adults, in the same way the 300 million eggs was an artifact of one Danish ship. The real arc is an animal that starts life as a fairly normal opportunist, eating rich coastal food while it's small, and migrates onto the jelly economy as it grows into the body that can afford to, which is its own kind of tell, if you think about it. Nothing chooses the poorest food in the ocean while richer food is affordable. You graduate onto jelly. You end up there because the one thing jelly has going for it, the only thing, is that almost nobody else wants it, and there is an ocean of it. It's the market nobody competes in. A tuna can't run its hot, expensive body on jelly. The fuel doesn't cover the burn rate. A sunfish, cheap and cold and patient, is one of the very few large animals whose overheads are low enough to live on the margin. And in exchange, it gets a food supply with no queue, spread across every ocean on Earth. The lottery strategy demanded a huge, cheap body. The huge, cheap body is what unlocks the empty niche. The pieces of this animal lock together. While we're inside the jelly economy, settle a debt from earlier, because I flagged an irony back in the larval gauntlet and promised we'd return to it. Among the drizzle of small mouths that eat sunfish eggs and larvae are jellyfish and comb jellies. Gelatinous predators are voracious consumers of fish eggs and fish larvae. A swarm of comb jellies can strip the early life stages out of a patch of water with industrial thoroughness, which means the animals that devour the sunfish's offspring by the million are the same class of animals the adult sunfish spends its life devouring. The sunfish grows up, if it grows up, by surviving the jellies, and then turns around and makes a career of eating them. Its childhood enemies are its adult groceries. There aren't many food webs in the ocean with a loop that tight, and it gives the whole strategy one more layer. Every jelly an adult clips apart at depth belongs to the guild that taxed its own generation nearly to extinction. Nobody should call that revenge. Think of it as a market with two counters. But it does mean the sunfish and the jellies are locked together at both ends of life, each eating the other's future. And the balance of that exchange, how much a healthy population of giant jelly eaters suppresses the animals that eat fish eggs, including sunfish eggs, is one of those ecosystem questions that's easy to pose and so far impossible to measure. It also puts the sunfish in an exclusive and increasingly interesting club. Very few large animals eat gelatinous plankton for a living. The famous members are the sea turtles, especially the leatherback, and the sunfishes. And ecologists have begun to care about that club much more than they used to, because there's a live debate about whether parts of the modern ocean are tilting toward jelly, whether warming water and the removal of competing fish are letting gelatinous blooms grow bigger and more frequent in some seas. That debate is wide open. The data are patchy, and the trend claims get contested, so hold it loosely. If it's even partly right, though, then the ocean's few professional jelly eaters start to look like infrastructure, one of the only breaks on a runaway lane of the food web. The animal built by the ocean's poorest market may end up mattering because of exactly how much of that market it clears. And the jelly economy explains the commuting, because of the one fact the surface drifter myth never had to confront. Most of the jelly, most of the day is down. The open ocean runs a daily rhythm that dwarfs any migration of wildebeest, and most people have never heard of it. Every evening, an immense layer of life, small fish, krill, and above all gelatinous animals, siphonophores, salps, comb jellies, rises from the deep twilight toward the surface to feed in the dark. Every dawn it sinks back down hundreds of feet to hide from daylight and the eyes of predators. It's called the deep scattering layer because there's so much life in it that early sonar operators mistook it for the sea floor, a phantom bottom that moved up and down with the sun. The biomass involved is so vast that this vertical commute is often called the largest migration on the planet, and it happens every single day everywhere, unseen. For a jelly-eating sunfish, that layer is the pantry, and during daylight the pantry is in the basement, below the thermocline, in the cold. Now look back at those sawtooth dive traces, dozens of drops a day into 40-something degree water, and they start reading as a delivery schedule. The fish is following its food down. Nakamura's camera tags off Japan caught the act itself. Footage from the backs of diving sunfish shows them cruising through the twilight zone, picking through the drifting gelatinous animals of the scattering layer. And the cameras recorded something the stomach DNA had hinted at. The sunfish are choosy. The tagged fish concentrated on particular prey, notably siphonophores, the long chain-forming colonial animals related to the Portuguese man-of-war, and the footage suggests they go preferentially for the denser, more nutritious parts of those chains rather than swallowing the whole ribbon. Even down in the poverty economy, the animal shops for the protein. So the daytime sunfish is a vertical commuter running a route between a warm surface and a cold pantry, clipping the best parts off the food nobody wants, dozens of round trips a day. And now the physiology bill comes due, the one we flagged on the way down. Every trip to the pantry is a trip into the refrigerator, and the sunfish pays for it in body heat. The Japanese tags carried thermometers as well as cameras, measuring the fish's internal temperature alongside the water temperature, and the traces are as legible as a bank statement. During each deep foraging bout, core body temperature slides steadily downward, degree after degree, as the surrounding cold pulls heat out through gills and skin. A big sunfish, with all that insulating bulk, cools slowly, which is the payoff of the thermal inertia I mentioned. A small one cools fast. Either way, the direction is one way, and the destination is trouble, because a fish that lets its core drop too far becomes a slow, dim version of itself, in a layer of the ocean where slow and dim is how you end up as someone else's calories, or simply too sluggish to keep foraging at all. Cold is a debt. It compounds with every minute at depth. And there is exactly one place in the sunfish's world where that debt can be repaid: the surface, the warm, sunlit, food-poor surface. Watch what the tagged fish do at the end of a run of dives, and the whole famous pose finally confesses what it is. The fish climbs out of the cold, planes up into the warm layer, and lies down flat on its side at the surface. Maximum area to the sun, the thin warm layer, and the sky. The thermometer trace turns around and climbs, degree after degree, heat flowing back into the body, and when the core comes back up to operating temperature, minutes or tens of minutes later, depending on the animal's size and the day, the fish rights itself and dives again. The sunbathing is the recharge half of a thermal duty cycle. The animal runs its errands in a refrigerator and pays the heat debt back in the solarium, over and over all day. Some observations suggest it even manages the process, angling and presenting its darker dorsal surface hanging in the warmest millimeter of the sea where sunlight actually accumulates. The pose that made 3 centuries of sailors write lazy giant in their logbooks turns out to be the visible half of one of the most disciplined energy routines in the open ocean. That gray disk on the water is a machine between shifts, warming its blood to go back down. Except that heat is not the only reason a sunfish goes to the surface, and here the story picks up the thread it's owed you since the opening. Because there's a problem with living the way this animal lives, a problem that accumulates on it and in it, like interest on a bad loan. The problem has legs and hooks and suckers, and the sunfish carries more of it than almost any animal in the sea: parasites. The ocean sunfish may be the most parasitized large animal in the ocean. The published surveys read like a phone book. The tallies of distinct parasite species recorded from sunfish run into the dozens across every category the parasite world offers. Flatworms in the gut and the gills, roundworms coiled in the muscle, tapeworm larvae in the flesh, crustacean parasites clamped to the skin, to the fins, inside the mouth, on the gills. Some live on it, some live in it, and some live in the things that live on it, parasites of parasites, a food web whose entire geography is one fish. 2 of them are worth meeting properly: Brooklyn, because you can see both with the naked eye, and one of them was on screen in the first minute of this video. The first is a copepod, a crustacean, called Penella. It's a relative of the tiny copepods that swarm in plankton, except this one has traded the free-swimming life for something out of a horror film. The female drives her head into the sunfish's flesh and anchors there, head down, embedded, sometimes inches deep, and her body elongates into a dark stalk that trails out of the wound, with a pair of long egg strings streaming from the end like ribbons. From the outside, you see what looks like a piece of black cord hanging out of the fish's side. That is a living animal, feeding, with its head buried in sunfish and its reproduction flapping in the current. Remember the albatross on the flank, driving its bill in and pulling loose something long and dark and anchored deep? Now you know what it was pulling? The second is a flatworm with the memorable habit of living stuck to the sunfish's gills and mouth, in colonies, where the water flows over it forever. And beyond those two, sunfish skin plays host to whole gardens, barnacle-like hangers-on, amphipods, leeches, things that raft on the animal the way mussels raft on a pier. Divers who get close to big sunfish describe the skin as a landscape, scarred, patched, populated. The animal is a habitat with fins. The reasonable question is why? Why this fish? Sharks aren't clean. Whales carry their barnacles and lice. Everything big in the ocean hosts somebody. What did the sunfish do to earn a parasite load that makes the surveys read like inventories? The honest answer is that it's not fully settled. And the interesting answer is that the leading suspects are, once again, downstream of the strategy. Everything about the way this animal lives is a gift to parasites. Start with the diet, because this one is nicely vicious. Many marine parasites, especially the worms, run multi-stage life cycles. They need to pass through one or two intermediate hosts, usually small planktonic animals, before reaching the fish where they mature. Gelatinous plankton and the small crustaceans drifting with it are exactly that kind of intermediate host. A sunfish's daily work is to swallow thousands upon thousands of servings of the planktonic soup, where larval parasites wait for a ride. Every meal is a lottery ticket of a much less charming kind. Eat the poverty food, drawn from the parasite highway at industrial volume for decades. And the load you carry stops being bad luck and becomes arithmetic. The same jelly economy that feeds the animal seeds it. Then there's the skin itself and the slow, steady lifestyle. And there's one more multiplier: time and range. If sunfish live for decades and cross entire ocean basins, then each animal samples the parasite fauna of thousands of miles of ocean and keeps a running total. The load is a travel diary. So the sunfish's parasite burden is the third bill for the lottery strategy, arriving right after the food bill and the heat bill. Cheap body, cheap food, huge intake, long, slow life. Every line of the design that solves the egg problem also feeds the worm problem. And unlike the heat debt, this one can't be paid back by lying in the sun. Parasites don't evaporate. Embedded copepods don't let go because the water got warm. If the animal is going to manage this problem at all, it needs outside help. And this is where the sunfish does something that, once you see it, permanently changes what you think you're looking at when you see that disc at the surface. The sunfish outsources its healthcare, systematically, at multiple scales, from multiple providers, in at least two entirely different parts of the ocean's economy. The first providers are fish. In warm coastal waters and around seamounts, there are places that function, with no exaggeration, as clinics, cleaning stations, fixed locations, usually a particular rock or reef head, where small fish make their living picking parasites off larger ones. The arrangement is one of the classic mutualisms in the sea, and everybody's rules are understood by everybody. The client arrives, adopts a special posture that signals no threat and please proceed, and holds still. The cleaners come out and eat the parasites off the client's body, in and around wounds, sometimes inside the mouth, and gill openings of animals that could swallow them without noticing. Sunfish are devoted clients. Off Bali, in Indonesia, there are reef sites where big sunfish rise from deep water on a schedule that local divers know by heart and queue up multiple giant fish hanging in the water column near the reef, waiting, while teams of reef fish, longfin bannerfish, and others work them over. The sunfish adopt the pose, nose up or nose down, fins spread, held stiff and still, an unmistakable full-body signal that the animal is open for service. Divers describe the fish tilting to present a flank, holding position for minutes at a time, while the cleaners pick at the skin. Then, the fish rights itself and planes back down into the blue. The behavior is so reliable that it built an entire diving industry. People fly across the planet for the chance to hang in the water next to a fish the size of a car while it gets groomed. In the kelp forests off California, the same service runs with different staff. There, sunfish coming through the kelp are met by resident fish, half-moons, and senoritas that pick over their skin. Different ocean, different species, on both sides of the transaction. Same appointment. Wherever sunfish overlap with cleaners, they find them, remember them, and use them, which by itself should end the dopey drifting head reputation, because using a fixed location service scattered across an ocean requires finding it, returning to it, and behaving correctly at it. The parasites, though, come in layers, and the reef clinics only reach some of them. The embedded ones, the Penella stalks, anchored inches deep, a bannerfish cannot extract. For that, the sunfish needs a provider with leverage. It needs something with a grip, a sharp instrument, and the strength to pull a buried anchor out of dense flesh. It needs a bird. So we come back at last to the opening of this video, and to the scene I asked you to keep. A gray disc, the width of a dining table, lying flat on the surface, one flank dry in the sun. An albatross standing on it with both feet, driving its bill into the flesh, pulling out something long and dark and anchored deep, and swallowing it, and the fish holding position, not flinching, not rolling away. Here is that scene again, with everything you now know switched on. The lying flat is the thermal recharge we've already decoded, but at the surface, it doubles as something else, an advertisement. A sunfish lying on its side presents the largest possible area of parasite-infested skin to the sky, where the ocean's seabirds patrol. Gulls do this work close to shore. Albatrosses do it far out at sea. The birds have learned what a basking sunfish is, a large, stationary, docile platform covered in food. They land next to it, or on it. They walk the flank like farmers walking a field, and they harvest, picking off the surface crustaceans and gripping and hauling out the embedded Penella, the black cords with their heads buried inches deep, the ones nothing on the reef could touch. The pulling must be violent. It has to be. The parasite is anchored, and the fish lies there and takes it, the same way it hangs stiff and still for the bannerfish at Bali, because this is the same transaction at a different counter. The stillness is the service posture. There are even accounts of sunfish at the surface near seabirds appearing to linger where the birds are working, which would make the whole arrangement about as far from passive as behavior gets. A fish commuting to the sky's cleaning station. So the scene from the top of this video, the dying giant being eaten alive by scavengers, was a routine appointment between two of the open ocean's most far-ranging animals, one providing heat and food, the other providing surgery. The albatross gets protein it didn't have to chase across 1,000 miles of empty water. The sunfish gets the only procedure in the ocean that can extract its deepest parasites. Nobody is dying here. Two animals are trading. And the jumping, the breaching we filed away earlier, slots in right beside it. A ton of fish clearing the water and landing flat generates a slap of deceleration that loose or half-attached skin parasites are unlikely to enjoy. Shaking off hitchhikers is the leading explanation for why sunfish breach, though it remains an inference. Nobody has counted parasites before and after a jump. If it's right, then the sunfish manages its infestation with a full portfolio. Reef clinics for the small stuff, birds for the deep extractions, and blunt force physics for whatever's loosely attached. An animal with no hands, no claws, no flexible neck, no way to scratch, has assembled a grooming system out of other species and momentum. Step back and look at what the parasite story has quietly done to the ledger of this animal's day. Because the bookkeeping is the theme of its whole existence. The sunfish surfaces to rewarm, and while rewarming, gets cleaned. It banks heat and sheds parasites in the same appointment. Meanwhile, the same surface hours put it in view of the birds it needs, in the warm layer its eggs will need. The behaviors stack. Almost nothing this animal does earns only one return because an animal running on jelly margins can't afford single-purpose behavior. Efficiency is this animal's religion. There is one more entry in the cost column, though, and it's the one that shows the strategy's teeth, because the surface is not safe. Everything the sunfish gains up there, the heat, the birds, the sun, it buys while lying still, in plain sight, at the boundary of two worlds. A basking sunfish is the most visible, most predictable, least reactive large object in its entire habitat. And the modern era has filled that surface layer with things the strategy never priced in. We'll get to those. Because before the modern dangers, you need the older, stranger fact, the one that explains why an animal can afford to lie exposed at the surface at all. And it starts with what happens to a sunfish when something does decide to eat it. The answer depends entirely on when in the sunfish's life you ask, and the difference between the two answers is the size of the entire strategy. Ask early, and everything eats it. We covered the larval gauntlet, the drizzle of small mouths. It doesn't stop when the larva becomes a recognizable little sunfish. A young sunfish the size of a coin, then a dinner plate, is an ordinary snack for tuna, mahi-mahi, billfish, sharks, sea lions, anything with the mouth for it. Young sunfish do the one defensive thing available. To the small and slow, they school. Groups of juveniles travel together, dozens of little discs flapping in formation, on the grim logic that a school gives each individual a chance to be the one not taken. The early sunfish is prey, full stop, and its childhood is a countdown. Get big before something finds you. Ask late, and the answer inverts. A full-grown sunfish has effectively aged out of the food web. Only a handful of animals in the entire ocean will take on an adult. Orcas sometimes, big sharks occasionally, and off some coasts. Sea lions in a way we'll get to that barely counts as predation. Everything else has given up. The reasons stack like armor. The skin alone is a fortress, famously thick and rough, a dense, gristly hide over that layer of structural jelly. There are old accounts of harpoons and knives struggling with it. The body is an awkward geometry for any mouth, a rigid vertical slab 6 feet tall with no convenient narrow end. And the flesh itself is a bad meal, watery, low-calorie tissue. The sunfish is protected, in the end, by the same poverty that built it. It converted the ocean's worst food into a body that is itself among the ocean's worst foods. There's a strange, closed-loop justice in that. The jelly eater becomes nutritionally a jelly, and inherits the jelly's best defense, which is that eating it is hardly worth the trouble. So the sunfish's survival plan, plotted from birth to death, is a race with a finish line. Be born into a lottery, survive the drizzle by luck, school while small, and grow at maximum possible speed through the window in which you're edible, out the far side into a size class where the ocean essentially stops trying to kill you. Every week spent small is a week of exposure. Every pound gained closes the door a little further on another predator's gape. Speed of growth is the design itself, the whole hinge on which the strategy swings, from spending offspring to banking a survivor, which is why the growth rate had to be impossible. And for once, this impossible number comes with a paper trail you can walk. It comes from a fish in a tank in California, with staff watching it every single day, writing the numbers down. The Monterey Bay Aquarium sits on Cannery Row on the California coast, and it's one of the very few institutions on Earth that has ever tried to keep ocean sunfish alive on display. Almost nobody does it, and the reasons are the animal itself. A sunfish doesn't recognize glass. It swims into walls. It's so committed to its slow flapping cruise that it can't maneuver in a box built for sharks and tuna. It gets skin infections from abrasion. It needs to be taught, patiently, by a diver, to come to a target and take food from a person, because the alternative is a fish that starves in a tank full of the wrong kind of dinner. The aquariums that try it sign up for a full-time occupation. Monterey signed up and put Sunfish in its open sea exhibit, the million-gallon tank, and because it's a serious institution, it weighed them. One of those fish arrived as a young animal at around 57 pounds. 14 months later, it weighed close to 900. Read that again slowly, because the aquarium scales were reading in real time, in front of witnesses. Somewhere over 800 pounds gained in around 420 days. Call it 2 pounds of new sunfish a day, on average, sustained for over a year. An animal adding roughly its own starting body weight every month. There are cattle feedlots that would blush at that curve, and cattle are being force-fed by professionals on the richest diet agriculture can design. This was a fish. Fish are supposed to be the slow and steady kingdom. A bluefin tuna takes years to reach a couple hundred pounds. The sunfish in Monterey put on weight so fast that the aquarium eventually faced a logistical problem that has to be unique in the history of pet ownership. The animal was outgrowing the million-gallon exhibit and had to be retired from display and returned to the Pacific, which for an animal that size is not a bucket and net operation. When Monterey moves a big sunfish, it's a lift and transport project. Slings and crews, and a fish the weight of a grand piano. Now the honesty tax, because this number needs the same scrutiny we gave Schmidt's. That growth happened in a tank, on an unlimited restaurant diet of squid and fish and prepared food, with no predators, no parasites worth mentioning, no 1,000-foot commutes, and no winters. Nobody knows the wild growth rate. That's one of the real, load-bearing holes in the science. To measure wild growth, you'd need to catch, measure, tag, release, and recatch the same individuals. And with sunfish, that has essentially never been done at any scale. The standard method for aging fish, counting growth rings in the ear bones, is a mess with sunfish because their strange soft skeleton doesn't lay down clean layers the way a cod's does. So we don't know how fast a wild sunfish grows, and we don't know how long they live. And those two blanks connect. An animal you can't age is an animal whose whole life schedule is a guess. The educated guesses put big adults at maybe 20 years or more, but the truthful version is that for the heaviest bony fish on the planet, science cannot currently tell you its lifespan. Keep that on the shelf of missing pieces, next to the unwatched spawning. What the tank number does prove, and this is why it matters despite the asterisks, is capacity. The machinery is real. Given food, a sunfish body can convert it into mass at a rate almost nothing else with a backbone can match. That capacity is exactly what the lottery strategy ordered. And notice, please, that it's the same purchase as everything else, made with the same currency. How does an animal grow that fast? By not spending on anything else. No dense bone. Cartilage is quicker to lay down. No expensive tail muscle bank. No metabolic furnace burning calories to stay warm. The sun does the heating, for free at the surface. No high-performance chase locomotion, the wings sip fuel, and a body plan that's substantially structured water, which means each pound of growth is cheaper than a pound of tuna would be. The sunfish grows like that because it is, from skeleton to skin, a machine with every optional extra deleted, and everything saved routed into a single line item. Get bigger. There's even a shape argument hiding in here. One more piece of design that only makes sense through the growth lens. A sunfish is a disc, deep and flat, rather than long and round. For a fish trying to sprint, that's a terrible shape. For a fish trying to exit predator mouths as fast as possible, it's inspired. Mouths are limited by gape, and gape is beaten by height. By growing tall and flat, a young sunfish becomes unswallowable at a lower body weight than a torpedo-shaped fish would. Every inch of height rules out an entire size class of predators, whether or not the pounds have caught up. The disc is a fish-buying safety by the vertical inch, on the same budget as always. So the childhood race can actually be won, and the aquarium proved the engine can run at the red line the race demands. From pinhead egg, through spiked ball, through dinner plate juvenile to a slab the ocean gives up on eating, the entire architecture of this animal is one long argument with mortality. Grow through the killing window before the killing window closes on you. At which point the survivor, the 1 in 150 million adult, is essentially untouchable, and its remaining decades should be quiet. That's the plan anyway. And in the ocean that plan mostly holds. The list of natural threats to a grown sunfish is short. What the plan never accounted for is the one predator that damages things for motives sitting entirely outside the calorie ledger, and the one habitat change no strategy can price in: the ocean's surface filling up with humans and their equipment. Both of those bills arrive in the same places, often on the same afternoons. And this is where the modern sunfish's story turns from strange to uncomfortable. Start with the sea lions, because what happens off California is one of the more unsettling pieces of behavior anyone has documented around this species. California sea lions are big, fast, clever, social predators, and they eat young sunfish. That part is ordinary. The unsettling part is what they do beyond eating. Around Monterey Bay, sea lions have been watched repeatedly, taking sunfish that they then don't eat. The sea lion grabs a small or mid-sized sunfish, and its jaws can manage what most predators can't. It bites at the fins, the animal's wings, the only propulsion it has. Sometimes the sea lion tears the fins off. And then, in the observations that people who've seen them don't forget, the sea lion plays. It drags the fish around. It flings it into the air off the surface, catches it, flings it again, the disc-shaped body spinning like a thrown plate. And when the game stops being interesting, the sea lion often just leaves, and the sunfish, alive, finless, unable to swim, sinks slowly out of the light toward the bottom, where the sea stars and scavengers of the seafloor finish the job over hours or days. Nobody can tell you with certainty what the sea lions are doing. It may be play in the fullest sense, young predators practicing handling skills on a target that can't retaliate or escape. It may be some behavior with a function nobody's decoded. Whatever it is, it's rarely feeding. The flesh is usually abandoned. From the sunfish side of the ledger, though, the interpretation hardly matters. The adult sunfish's entire defensive portfolio, the hide, the bulk, the worthless flesh, is built against predators doing calorie arithmetic. Sea lions playing frisbee aren't doing arithmetic. Against motive-free damage, the fortress has no answer. It's the one gap in the armor nothing in the strategy can close, and it stays open because it costs the attacker nothing. Even so, sea lions are a local hazard, a coastal toll booth on the young. The larger modern problem covers every ocean the sunfish lives in, which is all of them. And it comes from us. And the strangest thing about it is that almost none of it is aimed at the sunfish at all. Almost nobody hunts ocean sunfish. There are markets for them in parts of East Asia where the cartilage and flesh are eaten, but across most of the world, the animal has no commercial value at all. Fishermen don't want it, fleets don't target it, and it dies in fishing gear anyway, in numbers that, when the observers finally counted, embarrassed everybody. The counting is the part I promised you back at the start. Fishery observers on swordfish boats in the Mediterranean, writing down what actually came up in the nets. Swordfish there were long taken with drift gill nets. Curtains of netting hung across miles of open water, invisible, waiting for anything the right size to swim into them. A sunfish's day, you now know, is vertical commuting through exactly the depths those curtains hang in, on wings it cannot fold, with a body shaped like the one thing nets love most, a broad flat panel. When observers rowed along and tallied the catch, the swordfish, the target of the entire operation, turned out to be a minority of what the nets brought up. The animal that dominated the count, set after set, was the ocean sunfish. In the observed Spanish Mediterranean drift net fishery, sunfish made up the overwhelming bulk of everything caught, to the point where reports described proportions running as high as 9 in 10 animals. The boats were, numerically speaking, sunfish boats with a swordfish side business, and nobody on board wanted a single sunfish. The same pattern repeats wherever surface gear overlaps sunfish habitat, which is everywhere, because sunfish habitat is the temperate and tropical surface ocean. Full stop. In the drift gillnet fishery off California, sunfish were for years among the most commonly caught animals. In long-line fisheries, they come up on hooks meant for tuna. Totals across all the world's fleets are anyone's guess, and I won't invent one. But every fishery that has been watched closely tells the same story. This species is one of the most frequently caught large animals in the sea, by people who are all trying to catch something else. Most of them go back over the side. And here the news is mixed in a way the science hasn't resolved. A sunfish isn't a delicate animal. That height and bulk mean many survive the handling. And there are studies suggesting decent short-term survival for released fish. But hours pinned in a net, hauled, dropped on a deck, and rolled overboard is not nothing for any animal. And how many of the returned fish are alive a month later is one more entry for the shelf of things nobody knows. What's certain is the scale of the encounter rate. When your species is the single most common thing in nets across whole seas, even a small percentage of deaths becomes a large, absolute number forever. Then there's the trash, and one piece of trash in particular, because the sunfish has the singular misfortune of specializing in the one food that human garbage impersonates: a drifting plastic bag in the water column, backlit at the surface, pale, translucent, billowing, pulsing with the swell. Divers mistake bags for jellyfish. Researchers mistake them at a distance. A jelly-eating animal, hunting by eye in dim water for pale, translucent, drifting things, is being asked to solve a discrimination problem that evolution never set for it. Because for the entire history of the lineage, everything in the ocean that looked like that was food. Plastic bags have been found in the guts of stranded sunfish, as they have in sea turtles, the ocean's other professional jelly eater, and a bag in the gut of an animal whose intestine is a narrow tube. Many times its body length is a plumbing catastrophe, blockage, false satiation, a fish that starves with a full stomach. How often this kills sunfish at sea, where the deaths are unwitnessed and the bodies sink, is unknown, and the honest sentence is the ugly one. We mostly find out from the ones that wash up. Add the boat strikes, because a basking sunfish is a stationary, surface-level, slow-to-react obstacle exactly at propeller depth, and coastal waters keep getting busier. Sunfish get run over. They turn up with prop scars. They've stove in the hulls of racing yachts in collisions that made the sailing news. The animal's signature behavior, the flat, oblivious solar recharge that its physiology requires, is precisely the behavior that modern surface traffic punishes. Assemble the modern ledger, then, and notice what all its entries have in common. Nets it can't see, set for someone else. Bags that counterfeit its food, hulls crossing its solarium, sea lions with time on their hands. None of these are predators the strategy can outgrow. None of them do calorie arithmetic. None of them existed when this design was being audited by natural selection. The sunfish spent tens of millions of years perfecting an answer to the question the ocean was asking, and the ocean has started asking different questions. The conservation bodies have done their own arithmetic. The ocean sunfish is currently listed as vulnerable, one step outside the endangered categories, on the strength of those bycatch numbers and the general trajectory. For an animal that can outproduce every vertebrate on Earth, that listing is its own kind of remarkable. It tells you the modern kill rate is high enough to lean on a species that manufactures offspring in the hundreds of millions. Keep that in view, because it's going to matter enormously at the end of this story. A lottery strategy is spectacularly robust against the deaths of the young. It was engineered by the deaths of the young. It prices them in at the 99.99% level already. What a lottery strategy handles very badly is anything that kills the winners. Every adult in a net is the sole payout of hundreds of millions of tickets, and the strategy has no mechanism for replacing winners quickly, because winners were never supposed to need replacing. File that. We're one stop from the ledger where it all comes due, because before the final accounting, you need to know the last strange thing, which is that, all along, through every study and stranding and dockside weighing in this story, science was not even sure what it was looking at. The ocean sunfish turns out to be not one animal, and the sorting out of who's who in this family delivered, within the last decade, both the biggest fish ever weighed and one of the great hide-and-seek stories in modern zoology. The heavyweight first. Through most of this video, I've been saying ocean sunfish and meaning mola mola, the classic species, Schmidt's fish, Monterey's fish. But the family holds others, and the giant of the family is a separate species, Mola alexandrini, the bumphead sunfish, distinguishable by, among other things, a bulging forehead and chin. Remember the larva in the Sydney jar? The spiked golden sphere identified by DNA from a single eyeball? That was alexandrini. And remember the carcass in the Azores that took a crane to move? Here it is. In late 2021, in the Azores, the mid-Atlantic islands, a dead sunfish was found floating off the island of Fayal. Local researchers towed it into the harbor, and it took heavy equipment, a forklift crane and a dynamometer, to lift the animal and weigh it. And the number stunned everyone involved: 6,049 pounds, 2,744 kilograms, nearly 11 feet from fin tip to fin tip. It was a bumphead, Mola alexandrini, and it displaced the previous record holder, a fish caught off Japan in the 1990s at around 5,000 pounds, to become the heaviest bony fish ever reliably weighed by human beings. Whale sharks and basking sharks, built of cartilage, grow far heavier, so the outright crown stays with them. Among the bony lineage, the lineage of salmon and cod and tuna, and 96% of all fish species alive, the heaviest individual ever put on a scale was a sunfish that ate jellyfish, and it was found 5 minutes from shore, dead, apparently after a life nobody had witnessed a single day of. The necropsy added one last modern footnote. The animal had a blunt impact mark near the head with traces of boat paint. Whether the collision killed it or happened after death, the researchers couldn't say for certain. Even the record holder's ending is a hedge. And then there's the species that hid. This is Marianne Nygaard's story, the researcher from the Sydney larva, and it's worth telling properly, Because it's the cleanest demonstration in the whole saga of how little grip science actually has on these animals. In the early 2010s, Nygaard was doing genetic work on sunfish in the waters around Australia and New Zealand, sequencing tissue samples from animals caught as bycatch or found stranded. Sorting her sequences, she found the known species where they should be, and then a cluster of samples that matched nothing. Not mola mola, not Mola alexandrini, a genetic lineage of sunfish, clearly distinct, sitting in the data with no name and no body. Somewhere out there was a species of one of the largest fish on Earth that no scientist had ever knowingly examined. It took roughly 4 years to put a body to the DNA. 4 years of chasing strandings and fisheries reports across New Zealand and southern Australia, asking for photographs and samples of any sunfish that turned up, until the carcasses and the genetics finally converged on an animal that had been washing up on southern beaches all along. Getting logged as just another sunfish. It's sleeker than its cousins, without the bumphead's lumps, with a differently built clavis, and it had spent the entire history of marine biology being misfiled. In 2017, Nygaard and her colleagues named it, and the name is the best joke in the taxonomic literature, Mola tecta, from the Latin for hidden, the hoodwinker sunfish. The first new sunfish species added in well over a century, an animal the size of a garage door, discovered in the era of smartphones by a scientist following a trail of DNA that refused to match anything. The punchline arrived 2 years later on the wrong side of the planet. In 2019, a sunfish stranded on a beach in Santa Barbara, California, and photographs of it worked their way to the experts, who kept arriving at an identification that made no sense: hoodwinker, a species assembled entirely from Southern Hemisphere records lying on a Californian beach. Confirmation followed, and with it, the obvious, slightly vertiginous conclusion. The hidden sunfish ranges far past the southern seas it was described from. It's out there in the Northern Hemisphere too, and presumably has been all along. Being walked past, being logged as mola mola, hiding in the open inside one of the most photographed animal families in the sea. Think about what the hoodwinker means for everything else in this video. Every historical sunfish record you've ever encountered, every stranding report, every fisheries tally, every basking observation, every aquarium label older than 2017 was written by people who did not know this species existed. And some unknowable fraction of those records are actually hoodwinkers. Even Schmidt's fish, the 1921 female, under the 300 million, was identified with the taxonomy of 1921. The bumphead wasn't cleanly separated from mola mola in modern form until the genetics era either. The family has been shuffled and redealt within living memory. The most famous number in this story is not only a single, unrepeated measurement from a single animal. We can't even be entirely certain, at a century's distance, which species of sunfish it describes. That is the true state of the science on the heaviest bony fish in the world, and it's worth laying the inventory out plainly one time, because the shape of the ignorance is itself the final clue. Nobody has ever seen ocean sunfish spawn. Not in the wild, not in captivity, not once, anywhere, for any species in the family. The act at the absolute center of this animal's existence, the release of the most eggs any vertebrate produces, has never been witnessed by a human being. Nobody knows where it happens. There are hypotheses about offshore spawning regions and genetic hints. And that's the end of it. Nobody has seen a wild sunfish egg that could be certified as such. The eggs have no distinguishing address, one pinhead bead of plankton among trillions. The larvae, as you know, could only be assigned to their parents by sequencing an eyeball, wild growth rate, unknown, lifespan, unknown, population sizes, rough index estimates at best. You cannot census an animal that spends its days 600 feet down and its surfacing hours scattered across every temperate ocean on Earth. Number of species, revised within the last decade, quite possibly not final. Look at the shape of that list. Everything about the middle of the sunfish's life, the diving, the diet, the temperature games, the cleaning appointments, the migrations, is modern, measured, instrumented science, some of the best behavioral data any large fish has ever yielded. Everything about the ends of its life, where it comes from and where it goes, is a blank. We know this animal's daily schedule to the minute, and its life story, not at all. The tags told us everything about its Tuesdays, and nothing about its beginnings. It is an animal with a documented middle and undocumented edges, and the edges are exactly where the 300 million eggs live, which means it's time. We've built the animal from fragments, end to end, the pinhead egg, the spiked sphere, the schooling juvenile, the impossible growth, the winged flight, the cold pantry and the warm recharge, the parasite load and its outsourced surgeons, the fortress adulthood, the modern gauntlet of nets and bags and propellers, the hidden species, the crane in the Azores. Every piece, I promised at the start, would turn out to sit downstream of one problem. You've now seen the problem from every side. An ocean that will not let a mother protect her offspring or predict where survival will be sold, answered by an animal that converted its entire existence, skeleton, tail, diet, temperature, behavior, body, into a machine for buying tickets. So we return, at the end, to the tickets themselves, because there's a question underneath the 300 million that we've been circling this whole time without asking straight, and it's the hardest question in this story. Not how does the sunfish live this way? You now know how. The question is, how this can possibly keep working. How does a strategy survive, generation after generation, era after era, when it sets fire to essentially everything it makes? What does natural selection even mean for an animal whose offspring die in proportions where the word almost stops functioning? This is where the story stops being about one strange fish and becomes about the deep bookkeeping of life in the ocean. And the bookkeeping, when you actually run it, is stranger than the fish. Start with the accounting identity at the bottom of everything. A population that is neither growing nor shrinking replaces itself exactly. Over her whole life, the average female leaves behind, on average, 2 offspring that survive to reproduce. 1 to replace her, 1 to replace a male. That's arithmetic, true of houseflies and blue whales and us. Every species lands on the same destination. What differs is the shape of the spending that gets them there. A whale reaches to the retail way. She makes perhaps a dozen calves across her life, invests years in each, and shepherds most of them to adulthood. Her offspring survive at rates you could express in ordinary percentages. The sunfish reaches the same to the wholesale way, manufacturing offspring by the 100 million and surrendering essentially all of them. 2 roads, same summit. Once you see that, you see what the 300 million has been telling us the whole time. Fecundity that extreme is a confession about mortality. The number of eggs a lineage makes is a mirror held up to the death rate its young endure, and the sunfish's mirror shows a mortality so total that only a 9-digit number can climb over it. Show me an animal's clutch size, and I'll show you what its childhood is like. 300 million eggs means a childhood that kills, to within a rounding error, everyone. Fine, you might say. Brutal, but coherent. High mortality, high volume. The books balance. Except the books don't just have to balance on average. They have to balance in a way evolution can actually work with. And this is where the real trouble starts. The trouble that makes the sunfish's strategy a genuine open problem and not just a grim curiosity. Think about what natural selection needs in order to function. It needs a correlation, even a weak one, between what an organism is and whether it survives. The faster antelope escapes the lion a little more often. The better camouflaged moth gets eaten a little less. Across generations, Those small edges compound into design. Selection is a signal processing operation. It extracts the signal of quality from the noise of luck. Now put yourself in the position of a sunfish larva, a tenth of an inch of spiked hope, adrift in the open Pacific. What determines whether you survive the first month? Whether you hatched into a patch of water with enough food, which was set by currents and weather months in advance, whether an arrow worm happened to cross your path on Tuesday, whether the eddy you were born into spun toward the productive front or away from it. Almost none of that has anything to do with you. Two genetically identical larvae, one drifting into a bloom, one drifting into a desert, meet opposite fates for reasons entirely outside their bodies. At the scale of the individual egg, the ocean is running a raffle. And that raises the uncomfortable question that population geneticists have been chewing on for decades. In fish and oysters and everything else that spawns this way, when survival is overwhelmingly luck, what exactly is selection selecting? How does a lineage maintain a body as precise as the sunfish's, the synchronized wings, the thermal duty cycle, the exact clavis, when the filter that's supposed to do the maintaining passes winners at a rate of 2 in 300 million, chosen mostly by weather? Shouldn't the design decay the way any message decays when it's shouted through a hurricane? The resolution, as far as it's understood, comes in layers, and each layer tells you something real about how this strategy stays standing. The first layer is the sheer arithmetic of large numbers, and it cuts the other way from your intuition. Luck dominates any single ticket, yes? Across 300 million tickets, luck averages out. If a mutation makes a female's larvae even fractionally better at surviving, better at first feeding, slightly more efficient in cold water, hatching at a slightly better size, then across her hundreds of millions of offspring, and across the millions of females in a population, and across thousands of generations, that fraction of a percent is a landslide. Selection works on frequencies, and frequencies are exactly what hundreds of millions of tickets deliver. Enormous fecundity, far from blinding natural selection, hands it the largest sample sizes in the vertebrate world. The raffle is rigged, ever so slightly, by heredity, and at these volumes, a slight rig is decisive. The precision of the adult body is maintained by that ocean of dying young, one immense, brutally efficient screening experiment per female, per year, forever. The second layer is subtler, and it explains a detail from the very beginning of this story that might have struck you as a footnote. Remember the batch spawning, the evidence that the ovary's 300 million is inventory rather than one release? That sunfish probably spend their eggs in installments? In a lottery where the winning conditions move, that's the strategy's second engine. Spreading eggs across months and locations is what statisticians would call diversification and what evolutionary biologists call bet hedging. Don't stake everything on one patch of water in 1 week, because patches fail wholesale. The mother cannot know where the winning water will be. What she can do is scatter her bets so widely, in space and time, that no single failure, no one bad month, storm, or barren eddy can zero her out. The whale, unable to diversify, buys insurance instead, in the form of parental care. She protects her one bet with her body. The sunfish, unable to protect, diversifies to the physical limit of her ovaries. Both are answers to variance. The sunfish's answer just happens to look, from the outside, like madness. The third layer was discovered in the genes, and it deserves a name and a face, because it's one of the stranger findings in modern marine biology. An American geneticist named Dennis Hedgecock, working on oysters, another animal that spawns astronomical numbers into open water, noticed something odd in the genetics of wild populations. The diversity was too low. A population of millions of adults should be a deep reservoir of genetic variety. But generation after generation, the effective breeding population, the number of individuals whose offspring actually stocked the next generation, appeared to be orders of magnitude smaller than the number of animals in the water. His explanation has become famous in the field under the name sweepstakes reproductive success, and it goes like this. In any given season, the ocean's conditions, the right temperature meeting the right bloom meeting the right current, line up only in a few places and moments. The offspring that happen to be in those few sweet spots survive en masse. Everyone else's offspring, the vast majority of all parents in the population, die essentially to the last individual. Reproduction in these species runs as a sweepstakes. Each round, a small minority of parents wins colossally, and most parents, most fertile, healthy, successful adults, leave nothing at all. Whether sunfish genetics show this exact signature hasn't been worked out the way it has for oysters and some commercial fish. Sunfish are, as you may have gathered, hard to sample. But sunfish are close to the perfect caricature of the biology the theory describes. Maximal eggs, zero care, planktonic young at the mercy of oceanography. And if the sweepstakes picture applies to them even approximately, it rewrites what that basking adult means one more time. It would mean most adult sunfish, most of the giants, most of the 6,000-pound record breakers are reproductive dead ends through no failure of their own, purely because in the years they spawned, their eggs happened to miss the sweet spots, and the ocean's next generation of sunfish descends, disproportionately, from a lucky few whose spawning happened to intersect a good eddy in a good month. The lottery is played by the parents too, with their whole lives as the stake. Put the 3 layers together, and you can finally see the machine that makes 300 million stable rather than suicidal. Volume converts luck into statistics. Spreading converts catastrophe into averages. And the sweepstakes structure means the strategy doesn't need most winners to come from most parents. It only needs the population, as a whole, to keep enough tickets and enough drawings that somebody's numbers come up somewhere every year. The design has been load-tested by tens of millions of years of storms, failed blooms, shifted currents, ice ages, warm ages, and it kept the books balanced through all of it. 2 survivors per female, on average, over lifetimes. Across oceans, it is a system with exactly 1 failure mode. Nothing in it can compensate for losing the adults. Every mechanism in the machine, the volume, the spreading, the sweepstakes, operates through the survivors. The adults are the only components that carry the winnings forward. They are the accumulated capital of the whole scheme. Each one the compressed result of hundreds of millions of trials, and the strategy protects them with size and hide and worthless flesh precisely because they are irreplaceable on any short time scale. A larva lost is nothing. The system prices larvae at effectively 0. An adult lost is hundreds of millions of trials written off, and worse, all her future years of ticket buying with them. Which is why the modern ledger, the nets that catch sunfish by the thousand, the propellers at solarium depth, the bags in the gut, reads the way it does to a population biologist. Industrial bycatch sits outside the gauntlet altogether. The gauntlet was always aimed at the young. This is aimed indiscriminately at the capital. There's a version of this story that ends right there with a tidy moral about fragile giants. I'm not going to end there, because the biology has 2 more turns in it, and they're the ones that have been bothering scientists longer than any net has existed. The first is a question the strategy raises about itself. The second is a question about what, exactly, you're looking at when you finally see a live adult sunfish. Neither has a clean answer. Both are better than the moral. The first question, why 300 million? Not why many. We've covered why many. Why this many and not more? Because notice that the logic we've built has no obvious break in it. If eggs are nearly free and survival is a raffle, then more tickets always beats fewer tickets. Halve the size of each egg and you could double the count. Halve it again, double it again. Run that logic to its end, and every ocean spawner should be racing toward infinite eggs of infinitesimal size. And they aren't. Fecundities in the sea run from hundreds to thousands to millions, to the sunfish's hundreds of millions. And then the ladder stops. Nothing lays trillions. Something stops the slide. And the something is a floor built into the egg itself. An egg has to contain an actual viable start. Enough yolk to power the larva to its first meal, enough material to build eyes that can find that meal and a mouth that can take it. Cut below the minimum and you're printing blanks. Eggs whose larvae hatch too feeble to feed and die at 100% regardless of luck. Every spawning species sits somewhere on this trade-off between the size of each bet and the number of bets, and where it sits is tuned by the mortality structure of its particular nursery. What the sunfish's position on the ladder tells you is that its nursery sits at the far, bleak end of the spectrum, an environment so dominated by blind luck that it pays to shave the individual egg down to something within sight of the viability floor and pour everything into count. The 300 million is a solved equation. It is, as far as anyone can tell, roughly what the arithmetic of the open ocean demands for a body this size playing this game, which is why the number, however wobbly its century-old measurement, never smelled wrong to the biologist repeating it. It's the order of magnitude the strategy predicts. And there's a second break worth naming, because it operates on the mother rather than the egg. Her ovary output isn't judged on one good year. A strategy in a fluctuating ocean is judged on the run of years, including the failures, and a mother who spent herself utterly on one season's spawn, burning her reserves, her condition, her survival margin, would be making the exact mistake the whole design exists to avoid, concentrating the bet. The observed sunfish pattern, years of growth before maturity, then repeated spawning across a long adult life, batch after batch, season after season, is the shape you'd expect from a gambler whose real edge comes from staying at the table for decades. Longevity is part of the fecundity. The giant lying in the sun is the strategy's way of keeping a ticket-buying machine alive through the bad years so it's still purchasing when a sweepstakes year finally comes, which incidentally gives the missing lifespan number a weight it didn't have when we shelved it earlier. If we don't know how long sunfish live, we don't know how many drawings each adult gets to enter, which means we don't actually know the lifetime arithmetic of the most fecund vertebrate on Earth. The most important quantity in this animal's evolutionary story is one of the ones nobody has measured. The second question is stranger, and it's the one I want to leave you inside. What is an adult ocean sunfish? Statistically speaking, do the division. 2 eventual survivors out of a lifetime output in the hundreds of millions. Even being generous with the wobbly numbers, the odds that any particular sunfish egg becomes an adult sunfish are somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 in 100 million, and plausibly worse. Numbers like that don't mean anything as words, so anchor it to the one place modern life makes you feel such odds: the jackpot lottery. The chance of winning the Powerball jackpot on a single ticket is about 1 in 292 million. Same territory, the same order of oblivion. Now go stand mentally at that cleaning station off Bali, where the divers hang in the blue and the big sunfish queue up over the reef with their fins spread waiting for the bannerfish. Every animal in that queue is a jackpot, and I mean that arithmetically rather than as a figure of speech. Each of those fish, as an egg, faced odds of survival comparable to a lottery ticket's odds of winning everything, and won. A diver drifting along a line of 5 basking adults is looking at 5 consecutive 100 million to 1 events hanging in open water, being groomed. There is no other class of large animal on Earth for which that sentence is true. A whale in front of you was always likely to exist, her mother made sure. The sunfish in front of you is the single surviving representative of a doomed multitude, the one ticket out of the drum, and its every ordinary act flapping, basking, queuing at a reef, is performed by a statistical apparition. And here's the turn that this arithmetic forces, the one that reorganizes the whole species in your head. If adults are jackpots, then the species consists entirely of jackpot winners. Every sunfish that has ever cruised past a diver, ever stranded on a beach, ever been weighed by a crane in the Azores, ever had a camera strapped to its back off Japan, every sunfish any human has ever laid eyes on above the size of a dinner plate, is drawn exclusively from the vanishingly small tail of its generation's distribution. The animal we know, the animal this entire video has described, is the exception compiled. The typical ocean sunfish, the median experience of being this species, is 2 weeks long, 1/10 of an inch, and ends in the dark in a mouth you'd need a microscope to fear. The gray disk in the sun is not what a sunfish usually is. It's what a sunfish almost never gets to be. Biologists have a dry phrase for the error of studying only the visible survivors of a filtering process: survivorship bias. Militaries fell into it studying the bullet holes in bombers that made it home. Medicine falls into it studying patients who lived to be counted. The ocean sunfish may be the purest case of it in the natural world, an animal whose entire public existence, scientific and popular, is built from a sample of roughly 1 in 100 million, while the other hundreds of millions per female per lifetime pass through the world unseen, unweighed, unphotographed, dissolving back into the plankton they briefly were. Carelessness never came into it. We misunderstood the sunfish because the animal available to be understood is, by the mathematics of its own strategy, a fluke, impersonating a species. Which is why it's worth being exact, here at the end, about how much of this story to call solved. The mechanics are solved, or close to it. The tags and the cameras and the stomach DNA and the aquarium scales have done their work. And the middle of this animal's life has gone from myth to measurement inside one human generation. The drifting sunbather is dead. The vertical commuter with the thermal duty cycle and the outsourced surgeons stands in its place, and that correction is permanent. Nobody will ever be able to look at the basking pose again and honestly see laziness. The strategy, though, the thing the whole animal is downstream of, sits in a stranger condition. We have a theory of why it works: the large number screening, the spread bets, the sweepstakes, the egg size floor, the long gambling life. The theory is good. It's coherent. It's mathematically respectable. It fits everything we can check. And almost none of it has actually been checked on this animal, because the places you'd have to check are precisely the blanks in the inventory. The central event has never been observed. In any sunfish species, once. The eggs have never been certified in the wild. The larvae can barely be identified. The lifetime output of a single female, the actual number of drawings she enters and tickets she buys, has never been tracked for even one individual. The sweepstakes signature has not been read in sunfish genes. We have, in the strictest sense, a complete explanation for a phenomenon nobody has ever seen happen. What we have instead of observation is persistence, and it's worth being precise about what persistence proves. The sunfish family's fossil relatives reach back tens of millions of years. Molas, or something like them, have been buying tickets since before the Alps finished rising. Through ice ages, through warm spikes, through reorganizations of the ocean's currents that redrew every nursery on Earth. A strategy this exposed to luck, running continuously for that long, is its own evidence. You do not survive tens of millions of years of raffles on a broken model. Every era posed its version of the question: can a lineage really afford to lose essentially all of its offspring, essentially always? And every era got the same answer, evidently yes, because here it is, flapping. The fish is the proof. The theory is just the best story we've built around the proof. That's also the honest frame for the era being run right now. For the first time in the strategy's history, the mortality is landing on the winners, on the accumulated capital, at industrial rates, and the strategy's response is unfolding on a timescale no grant cycle will ever see the end of. Maybe the volume machine absorbs it. 300 million is a very deep well, and this design has absorbed catastrophes before. Maybe it doesn't because nothing in its history ever harvested adults like this. The vulnerable listing is a bookmark in an experiment with no control group, no replicate, and no one watching the endpoint. The question of whether the ocean's most extreme reproductive strategy can survive the one failure mode it never evolved around is, as of today, open. And it will still be open long after everyone watching this video is gone. That's simply how slowly a 20-year generation time argues with a century. So the record, stated plainly, ends like this. There is a fish that solved the open ocean's hardest problem by refusing to solve it. It could not protect its young, so it stopped trying, and spent the savings on numbers. To pay for the numbers, it stripped its skeleton to cartilage, deleted its tail and the muscle that drives one, patched the hole with its other fins, and learned to fly on them, floated itself on structural jelly instead of an organ, moved on to the one food in the sea with no other bitters, and ran its metabolism on sunlight and patience, commuting between a cold pantry and a warm recharge while birds and reef fish did its surgery. Every strange thing about it, every single feature that has made it a curiosity on aquarium placards for a century, is one-line item in the cost of manufacturing offspring at a scale no other backboned animal attempts. So the animal is exactly what that arithmetic looks like when it gets built out of meat. And the arithmetic itself we've had for 100 years sitting in plain sight on all those placards, quoted so often it stopped registering as information. One female. An ovary holding roughly one egg for every person in the United States. A lifetime of such batches, poured into water that will erase essentially all of it, wave after wave, year after year, decade after decade, so that somewhere in all that dying, on average, across an entire life of maximum effort by the most fecund vertebrate that has ever been measured, 2 fish reach adulthood. 2, out of everything. Each of those 2 will have beaten odds in the range where national lotteries operate, odds indistinguishable to a first approximation from never. Each will grow into a giant that the ocean cannot eat and science cannot age, carrying a genome that is, by definition, the rarest kind of document in the sea, a winning ticket, held by a species made of nothing else. 300 million in, 2 out. Measured once, on one fish, in 1921, and never checked, and after everything you now know about this animal, still the most accurate thing anyone has ever said about it. One last look at the water before we go. The disc is still out there. Flat, tipped onto its side, one flank dry in the sun, the fins standing up and wobbling with the swell. The albatross is still standing on it with both feet, working, driving its bill down into the flesh and hauling something long and dark out of the wound. The first time you saw that, at the top of this video, it looked like an ending. A big, slow fish stalled at the surface, being taken apart by a scavenger that got there early. Here's what's actually on the screen. That animal came up out of hundreds of feet of cold water maybe 20 minutes ago, where it had been clipping the richest sections off drifting colonies of siphonophores in water cold enough to put its whole body into slow motion. It's lying in the thin, warm skin of the ocean, because that is the only place in its world where the heat comes back. And it's lying on its side because that presents the most surface to the sun. The pose is a decision. The stillness is a signal, the same one it holds over a reef in Bali while small fish comb its skin, and the bird has learned to read it. The albatross is the only surgeon on this stretch of ocean with the grip and the leverage to pull an embedded copepod out of a hide several inches thick, and it's being paid in the parasite. 2 far-ranging animals, both of them a long way from any land, running a transaction that works for both. And the fish underneath the bird is a jackpot. Somewhere out past a coastline it will never see. In a month nobody recorded, one female of its species released a cloud of eggs, each one a clear bead the size of a pinhead, and the ocean erased almost every one of them within weeks. This is the one that came through. The spines it wore as a spiked golden marble are long gone, worn down to scars, and then to nothing. The tail it never kept is a scalloped fringe now, trailing behind as a rudder. Every pound of it was assembled out of the poorest food in the sea, on a skeleton half surrendered to cartilage. Asamautsgatkin halata yembi floated on a body wall that is mostly water. It grew through the window in which the ocean could still swallow it, and it came out the far side into a size class, where almost nothing bothers trying. It's the only ticket that paid, doing routine maintenance on the one body its whole generation managed to keep. Nothing about that is resting. If this changed the animal for you, I'd like to know exactly where it changed. Drop it in the comments because I go through them, and the answers are never the ones I expect. For some people, it's the tail, the fact that this thing builds a perfectly good fish tail and then dismantles it and patches the hole with its other fins. For some, it's the bird on the flank. For some, it's the smallest fact in the whole video, which is that the number in the title, the most repeated fact about one of the largest fish alive, was measured one time, on one female, in 1921. And nobody in the 100 years since has gone back and counted again. Tell me which one it was. And if you want to argue that the number is probably still about right, argue it. Because I think you'd have a case, and I'd rather read that than agreement. Like the video if it earned it. And subscribe if you want more of the ocean explained by the arithmetic underneath it, because there are a lot more animals down there whose strangest feature turns out to be a receipt. And out past the shelf, the bird takes one more step along the flank, finds nothing left worth pulling, and lifts off in 2 heavy beats. The fish stays a moment longer in the warm layer, gathering back the last of what the cold took. Then it rights itself, tips those long wings over, and goes down again into the dark to buy more tickets.